My husband's girlfriend walked into my hospital room while I was recovering from surgery and said, "He's moving in with me now. You should let him go." I was too weak to speak, but my daughter, sitting quietly in the corner, was recording every word. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Let's start. The morphine drip was the only thing keeping Patricia Hale from screaming when the door opened and a woman she'd never met walked in like she owned the room. Patricia couldn't sit up. 6 hours out of spinal surgery, tubes in her arm, her body still numb from the waist down in patches. She could barely turn her head, but she could see the woman clearly. Late 40s, expensive blazer, a confidence that didn't belong in a hospital room belonging to someone else's wife. "You must be Patricia," the woman said. "I'm Denise." Patricia blinked. The name meant nothing yet. It would mean everything in about 10 seconds. "I work with Frank," Denise continued, stepping closer to the bed, like she was checking in on an old friend. "I wanted to come see you myself. I didn't think it was fair for you to hear this from someone else. Or worse. Find out on your own." In the corner of the room, in the chair no one had noticed, Melissa Hale sat perfectly still. 33 years old, arms crossed, phone resting face up on her knee. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched. "Hear what?" Patricia managed. Her voice came out cracked, barely a whisper. Denise's expression softened into something that looked almost like sympathy, the kind people perform right before they say something cruel. "He's moving in with me now," she said. "I know the timing seems bad, but honestly, Patricia, you should let him go. You're not going to be able to take care of him the way you used to. Not after this. I think somewhere you already know that." The room went silent except for the beep of the monitor tracking Patricia's heart rate, which had just spiked. Patricia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Not because she had nothing to say, because her body, drugged and broken and 36 hours post-op, simply would not let her say it. Every word she wanted to scream was trapped behind a wall of anesthesia and disbelief. Denise took the silence as an answer. "I just think it's kinder if we're honest with each other," she said, straightening her blazer. "Frank deserves to be happy, and I think deep down you want that for him too." She reached out and, unbelievably, patted the blanket near Patricia's foot, the way you'd comfort someone at a funeral. "I'll let you rest," Denise said. "Feel better." She turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was Patricia's ragged breathing and the soft, steady beep of the heart monitor. Tears slid down her temples into her hair because she couldn't even lift a hand to wipe them away. Then, from the corner, Melissa finally moved. She stood up, walked to the door, checked the hallway was empty, and came back to her mother's bedside. She held up her phone. The screen was still lit. Timer running. 3:47. "I got all of it, Mom," Melissa said quietly. "Every word." Patricia stared at her daughter, uncomprehending through the fog of pain medication. "She doesn't know I was here," Melissa said. "Neither does Dad. Nobody does." She sat back down, set the phone in her lap, and looked at the door Denise had just walked through. "She just made the biggest mistake of her life," Melissa said, "and she doesn't even know it yet." Frank showed up 40 minutes later with a coffee he didn't offer to share, and a look on his face like a man walking into a routine appointment. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, kissing Patricia's forehead like nothing in the world was wrong. "How are we feeling?" Patricia couldn't answer, not because of the drugs this time, because she didn't trust what would come out of her mouth if she opened it. Melissa stood up from the corner. "Dad, can I talk to you in the hallway?" Frank glanced at Patricia, then at his daughter, something flickering behind his eyes. "Sure, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "Just come outside." He followed her into the hallway, coffee still in hand. Melissa closed the door behind them most of the way, leaving it cracked so Patricia could hear. "How was your trip to Columbus last month?" Melissa asked. Frank blinked. "What?" "The conference. The one that ran 3 days, but you charged the hotel for 5 nights. Melissa, I don't have time for this right now. Your mother just had surgery." "I know exactly what she just had, Dad. I've had 6 months to think about the timing." Melissa's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 6 months of watching you get a second gym membership to a gym 40 minutes from the house. 6 months of watching you delete texts and then forget your phone doesn't actually delete them from the cloud backup. 6 months of watching you disappear on Tuesdays and Thursdays and call it client dinners. Frank's jaw tightened. "You've been going through my phone." "I've been paying attention, which is more than I can say for you." He set the coffee down on the window ledge, buying himself a second to recalibrate. Look, whatever you think you know, this is not the time. Your mother needs both of us focused on her recovery right now, not Denise Corwin, Melissa said flatly. Frank went still. That's her name, right? Works with you at Heritage Mutual? Melissa tilted her head. I want to know how long. Because I've done the math, Dad, and I don't think it's 6 months. I think it's closer to 2 years. That is not... Where is this coming from? His phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached for it out of habit, then caught himself, but it was too late. Melissa had already glanced down and seen the screen light up through the fabric of his jacket pocket, the name clearly visible for half a second. Denise. Neither of them said anything. The silence stretched long enough that Frank actually reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, a tell Melissa had watched her whole childhood. The thing he did right before a lie. Through the cracked door, from the bed she couldn't leave, Patricia heard the buzz. She heard the silence that followed it. And for the first time since the surgery, something other than pain moved through her chest. She'd been telling herself for 2 years that she was imagining things, that the late nights were work, that the new cologne was nothing, that the distance was just marriage, just age, just the natural quiet of 35 years together. She hadn't been imagining anything. Frank pushed the hospital room door open again, forcing a smile back onto his face before he even looked at his wife. Sorry about that, honey. Work stuff. Patricia looked at him, really looked at him. His rehearsed calm, the coffee he'd left forgotten on the windowsill, the phone he was already sliding face down into his pocket. Frank, she said. Her voice was still weak, but it held steady enough to land. Yeah? Who's Denise? The color left his face so fast it was almost funny. Frank's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Denise? She's just someone from the office, Patricia. I don't know why. She was in this room an hour ago, Patricia said. She sat right where you're standing and told me you were moving in with her. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Patricia had heard in years. That's insane, first of all, Frank said. And there it was, right on schedule. The pivot Melissa had been waiting for. You just came out of major surgery. You're on a lot of medication right now, and I think you might be confused about... I'm not confused, Patricia's voice cracked, but the words came out clean. I remember every word. She said you'd be happier. She said I should let you go. She patted my foot like she was at my funeral, Frank. This is... Melissa, did you put her up to this? Is this some kind of... I didn't put her up to anything. Melissa crossed her arms. I was sitting in that corner the entire time, Dad. I watched the whole thing happen. Frank looked between his wife and his daughter, and something in his face shifted. Not guilt, not yet. Calculation. Patricia had watched that face for 35 years. She knew the difference between the look of a man who'd been caught and a man who was already 3 moves ahead, figuring out how to spin it. Okay, he said slowly. Okay, fine. Denise and I have gotten close. That's true. It's been building for a while, and I was going to talk to you about it when you were stronger, when the timing was better. The timing was never going to be better for you, Patricia said. That's the whole point. You wanted to do this while I couldn't stand up. That's not fair, isn't it? Melissa stepped forward, phone still in her hand. I have the whole conversation, Dad. Denise walking in here. Everything she said, time-stamped. Frank's eyes went to the phone like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. You recorded her? I recorded both of you, actually. This too. Melissa held it up slightly. Every word since you walked in that door. For the first time, real panic cracked through Frank's composure. Melissa, sweetheart, think about what that would do. To me, to my job, to your grandparents. Just delete it. This is a family matter. It doesn't need to leave this room. It stopped being just a family matter the second Denise walked in here and told a woman recovering from spinal surgery to let her husband go. Melissa said, you don't get to decide what stays private anymore. You lost that right the moment you let her come here instead of coming yourself. I need you to delete that recording. No. Melissa, this isn't about protecting the family image anymore, Dad. There is no family image left to protect. You burned it down. I just have the footage of the fire. Frank stood there, breathing hard, looking at his daughter like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. and not liking what he saw. Then his phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and whatever he saw on the screen made something in him harden, like he'd just decided the conversation was over. "Fine," he said. "You want to know where things stand? I already told Denise I'm moving out, officially, tonight." Patricia felt the words land like a physical blow, worse than anything the surgery had done to her body. "You're leaving," she said, "while I'm still in this bed. You have people to take care of you here. The hospital, Melissa." "Get out," Patricia said quietly. Frank blinked. "Patricia? Get out of this room, Frank." He looked at Melissa one more time like he was hoping she'd cave, hoping 33 years of being her father would count for something. It didn't. He picked his coffee up off the windowsill and walked out without another word. The second the door shut, Melissa sat down on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. "He's really doing this," Patricia whispered. "Yeah," Melissa said. "He really is." She looked down at her phone, at the recording still saved, still safe. But so am I. By the time Patricia was discharged 4 days later, still moving with a walker, still wincing with every step, Frank had already started packing. Melissa drove her mother home instead of letting her rest at Melissa's apartment because Patricia had insisted. "I'm not going to hide from this in my own house," she'd said in the car, staring straight ahead. Melissa hadn't argued. She'd just parked, gotten the walker out of the trunk, and walked her mother up to the front door of the house Patricia had lived in for 22 years. Frank was in the bedroom, 3 suitcases open on the bed, folding shirts like it was any other Tuesday. "You're doing this today?" Melissa asked from the doorway, arms still under her mother's for support. "She just got home from the hospital." "There's never going to be a good day, Melissa." Frank didn't look up from the shirt he was folding. "I figured ripping the bandage off was kinder than dragging it out." "Kinder to who?" He didn't answer that one. Patricia lowered herself into the armchair by the window, the one she'd bought at an estate sale 8 years ago, the one Frank had complained didn't match anything. She watched him pack in silence, the walker parked beside her like a cruel reminder of how little control she had over any of this. 22 years in this house," she said. 35 years married, and you're folding your golf shirts like you're leaving for a business trip. Patricia, don't. Don't what? Don't notice? I think I've done enough of that already." The doorbell rang. Melissa went to get it, and when she came back into the bedroom, "I'm stressée." Denise was 2 steps behind her, holding a stack of flattened moving boxes like she'd been invited. "I thought I'd help him load the car," Denise said, setting the boxes down on the dresser. Patricia's dresser, the one with her mother's old jewelry box still sitting on top of it. "Get this over with faster for everyone." Patricia's grip tightened on the arm of the chair. Melissa moved to stand slightly in front of her mother, an instinct more than a decision. "You really don't have a sense of when you're not welcome somewhere, do you?" Melissa said. Denise gave a thin smile. "I understand this is hard, but Frank and I are trying to be adults about this." "Funny," Melissa said, "because an adult wouldn't have walked into a hospital room to tell a woman recovering from spinal surgery to let her husband go. That's not adult behavior, Denise. That's cruelty with good posture." Frank looked up sharply. "Melissa." "What? I'm just describing what happened. Accurately. On the record." Melissa let the last 2 words sit there. Frank set down the shirt in his hands. "Look, both of you need to stop bringing up that recording like it's some kind of threat. Nobody's going to care about a video of Denise being a little blunt in a hospital room. It's not illegal. It's not even that dramatic." "I never said it was illegal," Melissa said. "I said I have it. There's a difference." "So what? You're going to post it online? Embarrass your own family for attention?" Frank laughed, short and humorless, zipping one of the suitcases closed. "Nobody's going to believe a bitter daughter's video, Melissa. You'll look unhinged. It'll blow over in a week." Melissa didn't raise her voice. She never did. That was what made her dangerous. "It's not for you to believe, Dad," she said. "It's not even for the internet. It's for Gary Ostrom at Heritage Mutual. It's for the board at First Baptist. And it's for Grandma and Grandpa." The suitcase zipper stopped mid-pull. Frank turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd walked in. "You wouldn't. You have a company that puts faith and family on every billboard in 3 counties, Dad. You're a deacon. Grandma and Grandpa still tell people at church how proud they are of their son, the family man." Melissa's voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you what's already in motion. Denise's confident expression had started to slip. You're bluffing. Am I? Melissa pulled out her phone and turned the screen around just long enough for them both to see the email draft already sitting in her outbox. Subject line, recipient field, the video file attached. I've had 6 months to prepare for this conversation. You had 6 months to stop having an affair. We both made different use of our time. Frank stared at the screen, then at his daughter, something close to real fear finally breaking through the calculation in his eyes. Melissa, think about what this does to me. My career. Your grandparents. They're 81 and 83 years old. This could put your grandfather in the hospital. You should have thought about that before you decided packing your golf shirts on the day Mom came home from surgery was an acceptable plan, Melissa said. She slid the phone back into her pocket. You have until tomorrow morning. Until tomorrow morning for what? Melissa looked at her father for a long moment. The man who'd taught her to ride a bike, walked her down the aisle at her cousin's wedding when her own father figure grandfather couldn't, told her 1,000 times growing up that family meant everything. To decide if you want to tell them yourself, she said, or if you'd rather I do it for you. She turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving Frank standing frozen between 2 open suitcases, and Denise for the first time since she'd walked into that hospital room with absolutely nothing to say. Frank didn't call his parents. By 9 the next morning, Melissa had known he wouldn't. Some part of him was still gambling that the threat would fade if he just kept packing and stayed quiet, so she made 3 calls of her own. The first was an email to Gary Ostrom, VP of Operations at Heritage Mutual Insurance, the man who'd stood on stage at last year's company gala talking about faith, family, and integrity as the 3 pillars the company was built on. Melissa attached the video, 3 sentences of context, and nothing else. No accusations. No editorializing. She let Denise's own voice do the work. The second was a message to the board secretary at First Baptist, where Frank had been a deacon for 11 years and where Robert and Jean Hale had been members for over 50. She kept that one even shorter. The third wasn't a message at all. It was a drive. Melissa sat in her grandparents' living room that afternoon, the same room she'd eaten Sunday dinners in her whole childhood, and set her phone down on the coffee table between them. I need you both to watch something, she said. And I need you to know I didn't want to be the one showing you. Jean's hands went still in her lap. Robert reached for his reading glasses out of pure habit, like this was going to be a photograph, a birth announcement, something ordinary. It wasn't. By the time the recording ended, Denise's voice, clear and cold, telling a recovering Patricia to let him go, Jean had her hand pressed flat against her chest, and Robert hadn't moved at all. He just stared at the dark screen for a long moment after the video ended, like he was hoping it would start over and turn out different. How long? Robert finally said. His voice had gone rough. How long has he been doing this? I think close to 2 years, Melissa said quietly. Jean made a sound Melissa had never heard her grandmother make before, something between a gasp and a sob, immediately swallowed back down out of 80 years of practice keeping herself composed. He let that woman walk into a hospital room, Robert said slowly, like he was testing whether the sentence could possibly be true by saying it out loud, while Patricia was recovering from surgery. Yes, and he was planning to move out that same week. Yes, Grandpa. Robert stood up. He was 83 years old and moved carefully these days, but there was nothing frail about the way he crossed the room to the phone on the wall, the landline he still insisted on keeping. The one he'd used to call Frank every single Sunday of Melissa's entire life. Call your father, he said to Melissa. Tell him to come here, now. Frank arrived 40 minutes later, still in his work clothes, clearly assuming this was damage control he could still manage. He didn't get further than the front hallway. Dad, I can explain. You can explain to your mother, Robert said. I'm not interested in explanations. I raised you better than this, Frank. I raised you to know what it means to stand by someone when they can't stand on their own. I did not raise a man who leaves his wife in a hospital bed. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Robert's voice, usually gentle, had gone hard in a way Melissa had genuinely never heard before. You have humiliated this family. And worse than that, you've humiliated yourself. And you don't even seem to understand that yet. Jean hadn't said a word since Frank walked in. She was looking at her son like she was seeing a stranger wearing his face. Frank's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down instinctively, and his expression changed, the color draining out of his face for the second time that week. "What?" Robert said. "What now?" Frank turned the screen around, though no one had asked him to. An email notification, subject line visible. Personnel Conduct Review. Please contact HR immediately. Gary Ostrom hadn't waited. Frank sat in Gary Ostrom's office 2 days later, in the same chair he'd sat in for 11 years of performance reviews and promotions, and listened to his career end in under 4 minutes. Heritage Mutual built its entire brand on family values, Frank. Gary didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The printed transcript of the recording sat on the desk between them, next to a folder with Frank's name on it. "We put your face on the recruiting materials last year. Frank Hale, 20 years, one family, one promise." That was the actual tagline. "Gary, this is a personal matter. It has nothing to do with my performance. It has everything to do with your performance the moment your mistress shows up at your your recovering wife's hospital bed, and it ends up circulating among senior leadership." Gary closed the folder. "We're not firing you for having an affair, Frank. People have affairs, unfortunately, and it's none of my business what happens in your marriage. We're removing you from your VP position because the entire executive team is now aware of it, and half our marketing is your face standing next to a slogan about integrity. You've made this company's brand a punchline." Frank opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. "HR will discuss severance terms," Gary said, standing, ending it. "I'd get a lawyer for the personal stuff, too. From what I hear, that's about to get complicated." The church board moved slower, but landed just as hard. A letter arrived at the house the following week, Frank's house technically, though he hadn't officially returned to it, informing him that he'd been asked to step back from his role as deacon, pending a period of reflection. Everyone involved understood that was a permanent sentence dressed up in polite language. Robert and Jean stopped taking his calls almost entirely. When Frank showed up unannounced at their house one evening, hoping face-to-face might work where phone calls hadn't, Jean answered the door and didn't invite him in. "Your mother needs time," Robert said from behind her, not moving from his chair. "So do I." "Dad, I made a mistake, I know that, but you're acting like I don't exist anymore." "You made a choice, Frank. Mistakes are things that happen to you. This is something you did on purpose, repeatedly, for 2 years, while your wife had no idea." Robert finally looked at him. "I'm 83 years old. I don't have unlimited time left to be disappointed in my son, but I intend to use what I have." The door closed. Denise lasted 11 days. She'd expected consequences, some fallout, some awkwardness at the office before it all blew over, the way these things usually did. She had not expected Frank to lose his position, lose his standing at church, lose his parents' respect, all within 2 weeks, with her name attached to every headline of it inside Heritage Mutual's gossip network. "I think we should slow things down," she told him, in the apartment he'd been staying in since Robert essentially banned him from the house. "This has gotten a lot bigger than I thought it would." "Slow down. Denise, I left my wife for you." "You didn't leave her for me, Frank. You left her because you wanted to. I was just—" She stopped herself, then finished it anyway, because there was no version of this conversation that ended well for him. "I was never signing up to be attached to a scandal. I have my own career to think about." She left that night. Frank sat alone in a half-furnished apartment with 3 suitcases he still hadn't fully unpacked. No job, no church, no parents returning his calls, and no Denise. For the first time since the hospital room, he understood exactly what he'd actually lost, and that none of it was coming back the way he'd left it. 3 weeks later, he showed up at the house, Patricia's house now, in every way that mattered. He stood on the porch he used to own and knocked like a man who wasn't sure he had the right to anymore. "Patricia," he said when she opened the door, using her walker but standing on her own 2 feet. "Please, can we talk? I think I made a huge mistake." Patricia looked at him for a long moment, really looked. The wrinkled shirt, the apartment smell still clinging to him, the way his hands wouldn't stay still in his pockets. 6 weeks ago, this man had made her feel like nothing. Now he was standing on her porch, looking like nothing himself. "You can come in," she said. "For 5 minutes." Frank stepped inside like he was walking into a courtroom, glancing around the living room like he was checking what had changed. Nothing had, structurally. Everything had in every way that mattered. "Patricia, I know I don't deserve this conversation, but I'm asking anyway. I made the worst mistake of my life. Losing my job, my parents not speaking to me, Denise leaving. None of that even compares to what I lost when I lost you. I want to come home." Patricia lowered herself into the armchair by the window, slower than she used to, but on her own strength now. No hand from anyone steadying her. "Do you know what I kept thinking about, Frank, those first few nights in the hospital after you left?" she said. "I kept thinking about the fact that you didn't even have the decency to tell me yourself. You sent her. You let another woman walk into that room and do it for you because you didn't have the spine to look at me while you ended our marriage. I know that was a coward's move. It wasn't a moment of weakness, Frank. It was a plan. You picked that timing on purpose. You thought I'd be too weak to fight, too drugged to remember, too dependent on you to do anything but accept it." Her voice didn't shake. That was the part that seemed to unsettle him most. She wasn't yelling. She'd done all her yelling in private weeks ago and come out the other side of it calm. "You miscalculated one thing. You forgot our daughter was in the room. I know I hurt you." "You didn't hurt me, Frank. Hurt is what happens when someone you trust makes a mistake. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision made over 2 years, executed the week I couldn't stand up to stop it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not angry anymore. Anger takes energy, and I've spent the last 6 weeks putting mine somewhere better. So there's nothing I can say." "There's nothing you can say that changes what you did while I was in that bed," Patricia said. "You can be sorry. I believe that you are, actually, now that everything's gone. But sorry isn't the same as different, and I'm 62 years old. I don't have time left to bet on different." Frank stood there, and for the first time since she'd known him, Patricia watched him run out of things to say entirely. "I'd like you to go now," she said, not unkindly. "Melissa's coming for dinner. First one since the surgery I'm cooking myself." He nodded once and let himself out. She heard his car start in the driveway that was hers now, in every filing that mattered, and pull away. 6 months later, Patricia stood in front of a classroom for the first time since retiring 11 years earlier. A substitute position at the local community college, a night class on American literature that had needed someone on short notice. Her walker had been replaced by a cane she barely used except on bad weather days. The scar from the surgery had faded to something she didn't think about anymore. Melissa sat in the back of the classroom on the first night, arms crossed. Watching her mother write her name on the whiteboard in handwriting Melissa recognized from 30 years of grocery lists and birthday cards. Frank was living in a one-bedroom apartment 2 towns over, working a job well below what he used to make, still not fully welcome at his parents' table. Nobody in the family talked about him much anymore. There wasn't much left to say. After class, Melissa waited by the door as her mother packed up her bag, students filing out, a few of them stopping to say they'd enjoyed the first session. "You looked good up there," Melissa said, "like you never stopped." Patricia smiled, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I feel like I never stopped. It just took me a while to remember it." They walked out to the parking lot together, the late evening air cool and easy. "Thank you," Patricia said, "for that day in the hospital, for sitting in that corner and not saying anything, when I know it must have killed you to stay quiet." "I almost said something," Melissa admitted. "About 100 times, but I knew if I did, we'd lose the only thing that was actually going to matter." Patricia squeezed her daughter's hand once, then let go, walking toward her own car under her own power, in her own name, on her own terms. "You gave me my life back," she said. Melissa shook her head. "No, you did that part yourself. I just made sure nobody could pretend it didn't happen."